Kennedy died 60 years ago, and his assassination is still a mystery. The background to that fateful day of November 22, 1963, is not limited to the United States of America of John Fitzgerald Kennedy. It extends, for example, to the Mexican capital. 60 years later, most American adults do not consider the case closed. In 1963, John F. Kennedy was seeking re-election as President of the United States of America. When he was elected in 1960, Kennedy had difficulty winning in the southern states, and the situation seemed to be getting worse in his fight for re-election. Decided to increase his electoral base in the south of the country, Kennedy went to campaign in Texas. On September 22, 1963, while riding in a limousine through the state capitol, Kennedy was shot twice and died instantly. Although the American government closed the case quickly, evidence contrary to the official theory was gradually presented. After the assassination caused great commotion, the alleged assassin was arrested 80 minutes after the assassination. Lee Harvey Oswald was initially charged with killing a police officer, but was later charged with killing the president. Oswald claimed to be innocent of both charges. As he was being taken to the police station, he told the media that surrounded him, "I'm just a patsy." Before he reached the public building, Oswald was assassinated. The assassin, Jack Ruby, was known to work with the Mafia. In prison, Ruby claimed that his intention was to avenge the president and prevent his wife from being forced to testify at Oswald's trial. Years later, mobster Johnny Rosselli was called to testify before the U.S. Senate about the case, stating, when Oswald was caught, the underworld conspirators feared that he would open his mouth and reveal information that could lead to them. That would certainly lead to a massive crackdown on the Mafia, so Jack Ruby was sent to eliminate Oswald. After the testimony, Rosalie's body was found dismembered on an American beach in 1976. Ruby's lawyers claimed that he had become insane during the incident and required medical care. The doctor the government ordered to treat him was Louis Jolyon West, a psychiatrist who had worked for the CIA on the MK Ultra project. 2 years later, before Ruby's appeal could be heard, he died of cancer. In addition to Ruby's connections to the Mafia, parallel investigation showed that Lee Harvey Oswald worked for the CIA and the FBI on several secret operations for the organizations. Lone Wolf? The Zapruder record led some to believe that the assassin, Lee Harvey Oswald, then a 24-year-old former Marine, did not act alone. The Warren Commission, which investigated the Kennedy assassination at the time, concluded, however, that Oswald acted alone, firing both shots at the president from a nearby building, a school supply warehouse for the Texas School Book Depository. Theories about the assassination. The fact is that Kennedy had close ties to the Mafia before he took office. Once elected, however, the president went on a collision course with organized crime, threatening his power and profits by opening investigations and lawsuits at the federal level. But this is just one of dozens of theories that have emerged since the attack. Probably the best-known work about the behind-the-scenes story of the assassination is the drama JFK, 1991, directed by Oliver Stone. In the film, Kevin Costner plays the role of New Orleans prosecutor Jim Garrison, who is not satisfied with the Warren Commission's conclusions. Garrison and his team suspect that Oswald was a CIA agent who served as a scapegoat. The mystery of Lee Harvey Oswald. Oswald spent some time in the former Soviet Union, which fueled speculation about Moscow's influence. Others suspect Cuban interference, since Kennedy was interested in overthrowing communist revolutionary Fidel Castro. The list of suspects in conspiracy theories also includes the FBI and Kennedy's successor as president, Lyndon Baines Johnson, LBJ. Political strategist Roger Stone, who advised former President Donald Trump, accuses Johnson in his book, The Man Who Killed Kennedy, the case against LBJ of having acted in collusion with gangsters and the American Secret Service to carry out the attack. The book was released in 2013 on the 50th anniversary of JFK's assassination, as were many other films and books that speculate about the case, which were also released on dates close to the anniversaries of the attack. The Oswald of Mexico. A report by the Associated Press, published after the assassination, immediately set the pace. J. Edgar Hoover, director of the FBI, announced that based on the information available, Oswald was certainly the sole perpetrator of the crime. This was what he would tell the new President Lyndon Johnson. Why was he so certain? Now, there was a lead being followed in Mexico that pointed with all certainty to this conclusion. On October 1, 1963, a U.S. citizen had entered the Soviet Union embassy in Mexico, identifying himself as Lee Harvey Oswald, speaking broken Russian. He asked to speak with Consul Valery Kostikov, someone referred to by U.S. authorities as belonging to the KGB's sabotage and assassination program, the 13th Department. The fact that Oswald asked to speak with him was significant. After all, for almost 2 years, the alleged assassin had renounced his U.S. citizenship and emigrated to the Soviet Union, where he lived for almost 2 years, working and raising a family. Before Kennedy's death, the FBI had intercepted a telegram, signed Lee H. Oswald, that mentioned meetings with Kostin, a code for Kostikov, and that if he had managed to travel to Cuba from Mexico as planned, he would have time to settle the common business. The vague reference becomes more objective with the framing. The deal could only be assassination. However, if we read the full description of the man who introduced himself as Oswald in Mexico, something doesn't add up. Lee Harvey Oswald was a thin 23-year-old with almost all his hair. His Mexican self appeared to be 32 years old, with an athletic build, baldness, and evident receding hairline. After decades, Last Witness breaks the silence. It is worth remembering that after 1964, the year the conclusions were published, a new panel created by the U.S. Senate, led by Frank Church, after whom he was nicknamed, reviewed the existing evidence on the events in Dealey Plaza, even discovering new data, and reached a very different conclusion. Instead of a lone assassin, there had been at least 2. In September 2023, the New York Times took a closer look at the account of Paul Landis, a former Secret Service agent who was just a few feet away from Kennedy when he was shot. Landis's account challenges the Warren Commission's single bullet theory, which claims that one of 3 bullets fired in the assassination attempt went through Kennedy's neck and then hit Texas Governor's John B. Connally, who was in the seat in front of him, in the back, chest, wrist, and thigh. Landis was never interviewed by the Warren Commission, surprisingly given his proximity to the event. The 88-year-old remained silent for 60 years. In a recently released memoir titled The Final Witness, Landis says he does not want to spread any conspiracy theories about Kennedy's death. But the former agent refutes the claim that a single bullet could have caused so much damage, which implies that Oswald was not the only shooter. More and more documents are coming to light. The book, Case Closed, published by Gerald Posner in 1993, comes to the exact opposite conclusion, that Oswald acted alone. 2 days after the assassination attempt on Kennedy, the shooter was assassinated by Jack Ruby, a nightclub owner, in the basement of the Dallas Police Headquarters. The Warren Commission found no evidence of Ruby's involvement in JFK's death or that the murder of Oswald was a cover-up. In December 2022, the United States National Archives released 13,173 documents associated with the JFK assassination, following a similar move by the Trump administration in 2017. With this, 97% of the documents related to the assassination attempt are now available to the public. It seems that tragedy is following the Kennedy family. JFK's younger brother Bobby was assassinated while campaigning for the presidency in 1968. Another brother, Edward, had his political ambitions ruined after leaving the scene of a car accident that killed an aide, Mary Jo Kopechne. JFK's son, John F. Kennedy Jr., died in a private plane crash on July 16, 1999, off the coast of Massachusetts. Kennedy Jr. was 3 years old when he buried his father. During the ceremony, the little boy saluted his father's casket with an innocent but powerful gesture that would become an iconic image. From his heroic exploits during World War II, to his scandalous affairs with the likes of Marilyn Monroe, to his civil rights advocacy and visionary plans for space travel, Kennedy has always fascinated people, and even more so after his death. Even 60 years after the president was assassinated in an open-top limousine, speculation about the motives behind the assassination attempt will likely continue for decades to come. Or, as director Oliver Stone said when commenting on the lone wolf theory, American public opinion has never accepted it. They know when something is wrong. Official version of the American government. Kennedy's Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson set up a commission to investigate the president's assassination. The commission became known as the Warren Commission. The conclusion of the legal bodies was that Lee Harvey Oswald was the assassin, even without material evidence of the incident. The American government also claimed that it is possible that Kennedy and the governor of Texas were shot several times from different angles due to the magic bullet phenomenon. One of the bullets allegedly hit the governor of Texas, curved around his body, exited his body, hit Kennedy from another angle, and curved around the president again. President Kennedy's wife and brother did not believe the conclusion of the legal investigators. Their disbelief was shared by a large part of the population of the United States. In 2021, the U.S. government authorized the release of some classified documents from the investigation. The documents do not contain relevant information about the facts of the attack, but new statements from Kennedy's relatives were released between the pages. President Kennedy's wife and brother argue that Lee, if he had committed the crime, would not have acted alone. According to Jefferson Morley, a researcher on the case, neither Jackie nor RFK believed the official theory that Kennedy was killed by a single man for no reason. They said that JFK was killed by his domestic enemies. That is what is on these tapes, and that is why they are so sensitive. Although the official narrative is that of a lone assassin, in the days following the Dallas attack, news reports circulated, driven mainly by information from the CIA and FBI, that Oswald was working for an international communist cabal. The truth is that in the midst of the Cold War, Lyndon Johnson's government toned down this narrative, and the Warren Commission chose a version more focused on Oswald in the interest of national security. Even CIA memos from the days following November 22nd become more cautious in the language used to describe Oswald's Mexican visit. The embassy guard said Oswald visited, leaving plenty of room for explanations such as an imposter. The tapes would remove any doubt. According to the CIA, they were destroyed. When? The accounts are contradictory. Agent David Phillips said, after he retired, that this had happened before the assassination. But the tapes are referred to as November 23, 1963, in a memo sent by the FBI to the Secret Service. Richard Helms, then the CIA director when speaking to the Warren Commission, says on the one hand that a photograph of a supposed Oswald in the CIA's possession was dated 2 days after he supposedly left Mexico City. Helms does not reveal, however, that the U.S. Embassy video, the one that filmed the supposed Oswald, had the correct date of the original visit. So at this point, so as not to lose count, we have 3 Oswalds. One real, another imposter, and a third whose origins are not known. The Church Committee, which would later question the original conclusions, does not take into account other evidence, such as the statements of the Cuban consul in Mexico City, who describes the impostor clearly and refuses to identify him with the real Oswald. However, the committee itself finds it strange that, according to the record, the real Oswald made many visits to the Soviet and Cuban embassies, and the CIA does not present any photos of its surveillance. However, it has more than 6 photos of the impostor that it wants to present as the real one. The FBI and Joseph Miltier. On November 10, 1963, the Miami police provided the federal organization with a recording in which a white supremacist named Joseph Miltier revealed, in a meeting recorded by an informant, that something serious was being prepared against Kennedy. He speaks of a plan involving men in tall buildings with rifles being prepared at that moment. The meeting took place in the early days of that month. Miltier was not a lone nut. He belonged to well-organized racist groups in the South, and that was why the police had followed him to the meeting. In another recording after the assassination, Miltier rejoices at the outcome and once again assures that he did not make a prediction that turned out to be correct. He simply told something he knew. What did he do with the FBI? First, he sent orders to discredit the source of the recording, an informant that the Miami police considered unassailable. Then he tried to force the conclusion that Miltier was lying. The truth is that he never sent either the recording or the informant's report to the Warren Commission. Lee Oswald is presented in the immediate aftermath of November 22, 1963, as a solitary man with psychiatric problems in order to make the idea of him as a lone assassin more acceptable. Legacy. Television was the main source through which people were informed of the events surrounding the assassination of John F. Kennedy. Newspapers were kept as souvenirs, rather than sources of up-to-date news. All 3 major television networks suspended their regular programs and ran newscasts continuously from November 22nd through November 25th to cover the issue. Kennedy's funeral and the assassination of Lee Harvey Oswald were broadcast live across the country and to nations around the world. The state funeral was the first of 3 that occurred within 18 months, the other 2 being those of General Douglas MacArthur and former President Herbert Hoover. The assassination of President Kennedy and the unsolved mysteries surrounding it ultimately affected public confidence in American politics. This death, along with the subsequent assassinations of his brother, Senator and former Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy, and the Reverend Martin Luther King, Jr., formed a trio that disillusioned the public with regard to political and social change. Many of Kennedy's speeches, especially his inaugural address, are considered iconic. Despite his relatively short time in office and despite the lack of major changes in legislation, Americans tend to vote Kennedy as one of the country's best presidents, placing him on the same level as Abraham Lincoln, George Washington, and Franklin D. Roosevelt. Excerpts from Kennedy's inaugural address were engraved on a special plaque and placed near his grave in Arlington Cemetery. He was posthumously awarded the Pacem in Terris Award. This award was created in honor of Pope John XXIII's 1963 encyclical, which calls upon all people of goodwill to secure peace among all nations. The Latin phrase Pacem in Terris can be translated as peace on earth.